Welcome to episode 522 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and you know I tend not to do previews anymore because they wind up being pretty obsolete within hours or even while I'm editing them because of a news update. And with all these Barcelona injuries, I can guarantee something has changed since the time I recorded this and you have it in your ears. But this Clásico does feel pretty big for a bunch of reasons, so there was a few things I wanted to talk about as we get into the first El Clásico of the season that isn't a friendly. And it does feel pretty big, but not to immediately give myself an out in case of a bad result or make excuses. It did feel pretty big last October, too, in the Liga. But as we know, that game wound up not mattering in the long run. It was a 3-1 loss for Barcelona last October. The big injuries at the time were Ronald Araujo and Andreas Christensen, which did force Eric Garcia and Sergio Roberto into the starting lineup. It was also still early enough in the season where Xavi was trying Dembélé on the left and Rafinha on the right, and certainly Barcelona also adding Lewandowski. I know he was scoring a ton in the Liga around that time already, and Ter Stegen was the best goalkeeper in the league, but it was at a point where Barcelona really weren't exactly themselves, and all those pieces didn't entirely fit together. The rest of the results last season did have some impact, though, more than that October match. Barcelona in the Spanish Super Cup 3-1 over Real Madrid, playing arguably their best match of the season, something that Xavi has agreed with since then and brought up that he would love to see Barcelona play at that level again. Gavi and Pedri in particular, if you remember, were just chef's kiss, some of the best matches they've ever played in their careers. Then there was that Copa del Rey semifinal. Leg 1 was Barcelona with that insane 1-0 win at the Santiago Bernabeu, where they barely touched the ball at all. And I go back to that match, and I looked at my notes again from that match. It is still one of the weirdest games I've ever seen from the Blaugrana in close to 20 years. Just uncharacteristic in every possible way, and yet they still won. Barcelona don't play that way and win games. It doesn't happen for 20 years, and that was one of those rare exceptions. Barcelona also got the 2-1 win over Madrid at the Camp Nou 3 weeks later. Big Frank Kessie match with the Rosalia shirt, if you remember. And that was a match that did feel like the title contenders had completely changed momentum by that point, where Real Madrid weren't on top, Barcelona were now on top. Then 2 weeks later was that ugly 4-0 loss at home in the second leg of the Copa del Rey. Vinicius Jr. with the counterattack goal in stoppage time in the first half, and Benzema's second half hat trick did Barcelona to the sword. This time around, though, there was no Dembélé, no Pedri, no Christensen, and no De Jong. So Gavi played left wing, Kessie, Roberto, and Busquets were in the midfield. Alonso played left center back, and Araujo was at right back. So going through last year's matchups feels like a little bit of a waste of time, especially that last one with all those injuries. But it does at least prove maybe a little something, and that's that the healthier Barcelona was last season, the better the result against Madrid, which always does prove to be correct for Barcelona. They get good results when they're at their best, which again sounds trite and stupid. I think every team is like that. But in particular, Barcelona seems to be when they're missing certain players. Xavi, because of the lack of depth and the finance issues and all that I have to tell you about the last few seasons, going back to the 2020 season and the pandemic and Bartomeu and all that stuff, Barcelona just does not have the depth to be missing major pieces and be able to take a result off of Real Madrid. So that really is one of the big questions that we're going to talk about for Barcelona in this match is, do they have enough? Who did they risk? How do they risk those players? And do they even have enough talent on paper and then in practice to take down Real Madrid? Let's talk about Los Blancos first, though, because I think the more telling game between these two, if we're going to go back and look at recent games, was the friendly they played in the preseason. The question going into that one was whether or not Xavi would play everybody to try to win the game. And then the starting 11 immediately confirmed that that was correct, that Xavi and Ancelotti the same was trying to win that game and prove a statement in the preseason. For Barcelona, it was Ter Stegen, Balde, Araujo, Dembélé, Pedri, Lewandowski, Gundogan, Christensen, Romeu, De Jong, Koundé. So yeah, basically a best 11 at that point of who they knew the personnel was. And obviously Gavi was injured at that point in the preseason, so Xavi didn't have to worry about having 12 players for his 11. But Ancelotti's 11, as I said, was similarly serious. Courtois, Carvajal, Militao, Alaba, Mendy, Camavinga, Tchouaméni, Bellingham, Valverde, Rodrigo, and Vinny Jr. And since that time, of course, Courtois and Militao with those ACL injuries out for the season, but everyone else pretty healthy. And with those lineups, Barcelona, they didn't crush them, but they were the better team, and they got the better result. Romeu was really good in that match. Dembélé got the first goal 15 minutes in, and the game was pretty tight then. But then you'll remember Fermin Lopez getting the second in the 85th minute on that banger from outside the box, and then Torres got the third for good measure, and it did feel like, in hindsight, with those two goals and the final result, that Barcelona did take it to Real Madrid, and they were the better side on that evening. And I know Kool-Aids who haven't been watching Real Madrid will say that Barca are coming into this game in not the best form. Close wins over Athletic Club and Shakhtar Donetsk since the international break, but Madrid hasn't been much better, if not worse. They drew Sevilla 1-1 in a game they were outshot in by Sevilla, and then they struggled against Braga in the Champions League, still snagging the 2-1 win on Tuesday, and they were up 2-0 in that game, but it still felt like Braga were kind of making Real Madrid sweat a little bit. So I want to throw out this predicted Real Madrid 11 for you. It's a 4-1-2-1-2, Kepa in net, Mendy or Fran Garcia at left back, but I'm going to say Mendy here. But again, if it's Fran Garcia, I wouldn't be that surprised. And then Alaba and Rudiger in the middle, Carvajal on the right. Up top, it'll be Vini Jr. and likely Rodrigo with Bellingham underneath them. But then in the midfield, and this is actually where the left back part plays in too. If it's Mendy, I think it could be Cruz because he did not play against Braga, so it might be more reasonable to expect him, that being Toni Kroos, to start tomorrow with Mendy kind of to cover. But if it's Fran Garcia, we haven't really seen Ancelotti starting Fran Garcia, who does get forward a bit more than Mendy, and there is more space left in behind. And it seems like defensively, Real Madrid are weaker on that left side when it's Cruz and Fran Garcia. So Ancelotti probably won't go with that. So in the midfield, I'm going to say that even with Mendy, I think he's actually, that being Ancelotti, he's going to go really defensive here. So I think Tchouaméni as the deeper midfielder, let's say that does happen, and then obviously we have to figure out who's in front of him. And I do think that Real Madrid go with Valverde and Camavinga over Kroos and Modric. But again, obviously there is zero surprise if Ancelotti goes with at least one of those vets. And again, I'd say that Kroos, because he didn't play midweek, would be the favorite to start there, and Modric coming off the bench. So I don't know exactly who might start. I do know the player to watch, and that's Jude Bellingham, of course. The only club that held him in check this season was Atletico Madrid last month, but that might have been less about Bellingham and more about how Ancelotti set up. Without Vini Jr. in the lineup and Rodrigo not commanding a second defender every time, Kroos and Modric weren't moving the way Bellingham needs his teammates to move to create space for him. Valverde and Camavinga were putting in a shift, but Camavinga isn't really a natural instinct defender. He is just much better as an all-around player, able to get forward at times, but also able to control the pace of a game, sure, but defensively, you do trust Tchouaméni in that position much more than Camavinga. So with Atletico Madrid having enough talent with Antoine Griezmann, Camavinga more than had his hands full to try to get forward into the box to create space for Bellingham. Attack-wise, Real Madrid still got their chances, though, and Atleti defended well as they do, but the issues were how Atleti exposed the space behind Kroos, as I mentioned, and the fact that Modric wasn't making any runs into the box the way that Vini Jr. or even Josuelo would. Atleti always had that extra man to pressure the ball and get out on the counter themselves. But that game was also a lot more about Atleti than I think it was about Los Blancos if you're Xavi watching tape. Atleti got the goal in the 4th minute from Morata, and you know what happens when Atleti go up a goal. So the second goal from Griezmann kind of put that game away 18 minutes in. Kroos got one back in the first half that made it interesting, but Morata's second to start the second really took the wind out of the visitors' sails, that being Real Madrid in that match. Madrid had 20 shots in the game total, which is actually a lot of shots, but only 5 on target. Atleti, meanwhile, had 10 shots, 4 on target. Real Madrid just weren't good enough in that game. They were off target, and they left some spaces for Atletico Madrid to exploit, and Atleti did the job. And that game kind of summed up what's interesting about both Real Madrid and Barcelona, is that we know the big tactical questions and problems, but we don't know how either team will go about trying to limit those issues. Defensively, Madrid, as I've been saying, isn't in the best way right now, and Barca create enough chances, even without so many of their stars, that they will have some moments in this game, and likely on set pieces too. The white shirts have been nervy on set pieces for the last few weeks, so Araujo, who scored on a set piece against Madrid before, maybe he can do it again. But Barcelona has their own defensive issues, which brings me to talking about their predicted 11. As I thought it over again about Cancelo, you heard from the 5 headlines from Shakhtar Donetsk, it was wild to me that Xavi didn't rest Cancelo. And I would say, well, that means that he trusts him more than anybody else possibly at that right back position, so obviously just put him in pen in that starting lineup. And I don't know, I'm going to zag a little bit with that. I could look dumb for this, but it might all make sense that Cancelo went the full 90 and Christensen and Balde got the rest, so that Balde, Inigo Martinez would have played himself into match fitness, and then Christensen and Araujo were just rotated in the last week to be your starting back line. Araujo has started at right back against Vini Jr. every match that the two have both been available for since Xavi took over. And I think that's the move again here. And if you're going to move Araujo over to right back, then yeah, you best have Christensen and Inigo Martinez in the middle. And I think the move says less about Cancelo than it does more about Araujo against Vini Jr. That is a matchup that you want to win. And when Barcelona and Araujo win that matchup against Vini Jr., they usually get the positive result in recent seasons. So let's do the injury updates real quick because that will greatly affect the rest of the midfield and the forwards. Even though it seems like everybody did practice, including Pedri and Koundé and De Jong, it seems like Lewandowski and Rafinha at time of recording will definitely be in the squad, with the other three certainly big question marks and likely not to feature even if they make the bench. But if everything does go right, it does seem like Lewandowski could even be the one to start from that group. And I think that does happen. And I think Lewandowski will start. We have heard positive reports about his progress for weeks already. And I think that does happen, that he starts. And the ripple effect goes through the squad. By starting Lewandowski, I think Torres goes to the right. And João Felix obviously stays on the left. And it's a big moment for Fermin Lopez and Lamine Yamal. But Lamine Yamal went 90 minutes on Wednesday. And just like Cancelo, I think that's because he was the one that definitely wasn't starting El Clasico, even if Rafinha wasn't coming back yet. I think it was always going to be Ferran Torres on the right, or Ferran Torres in the middle, and Fermin Lopez then gets the start. Well, when they did start together, of course, it was Torres out to the right against Athletic Club. But I think Xavi saw enough from that front line against Athletic Club where he would try it out in El Clasico instead of starting Lamine Yamal. Which does leave us with the midfield, where I don't think Fermin Lopez starts in the midfield. I think Gavi and Gundogan, of course, they're in permanent marker there. And Oro Romeu, I put in kind of that erasable pen. As much as Romeu is a worry against a counter, Fermin Lopez starting and having Gavi and Gundogan in the hole is a bigger worry. Not because Gundogan or Gavi can't handle that individual job. It's funny that Gavi did come out recently and say that, or maybe even today, that he is most comfortable in a deeper pivot position or a deeper midfield position. But I think the greater concern is that Gavi and Gundogan both have responsibilities to get forward. But because if you start Fermin Lopez, the space that he then leaves behind by being a goal-scoring threat, which is his job, that's what he's meant to be on the field to do, that would put Gavi and Gundogan in worse positions than Romeu would be in with the other two in the starting lineup. So that's why I think Xavi goes with it. I think Lewandowski, if he is healthy enough, definitely gets a start, and then the ripple effect goes out the rest of the squad. As I was saying, if Rafinha starts on that right wing, not that crazy, but I think João Felix and Ferran Torres, the way that Xavi's been talking about them, they keep their spot in that starting lineup. And again, that inserts Lewandowski. Yeah, then you have two midfielders who are definites, and then there's one of two midfielders that does change the entire perception of that game. I don't know. Even with the back line I mentioned that's a little more defending than Cancelo would have, then maybe that does mean that Xavi's more comfortable starting Fermin Lopez in the midfield. There's a few ways that Barcelona Xavi can go with this, and it is one of those where if Xavi gets it wrong, I mean, I think you're going to see that pretty early, but if Xavi gets it right, then Barcelona will get him in the front foot, and I see them taking the 3 points. I do feel like the last few times these two met, one or the other was on a roll, and the other one wasn't at their best. And this time, as I said, there is possibilities for everybody, but I have been listening to some Real Madrid stuff as I look to preview this game, and it seems like Los Blancos are usually pretty confident going into these Clásicos if they know that they're the healthier side or the side in better form, but this time around it feels like neither are at their best, and neither fan base is really coming in with an overt amount of confidence, which means there's plenty of excuses for everybody to go around, and that's exactly what you want out of El Clásico, of course. And not to downplay it that much, but a draw between these two is even more about other teams than it is about them, because that means that Girona only had to get a win against Celta, as this is being recorded just about an hour before that match, that being Girona and Celta, gets started. And if everything goes chalk, that means that Girona probably took points off Celta. Maybe, again, I could be wrong about that by the time you hear this. But if Girona take points and it's a draw in El Clásico, they go top of the table. And remember, Atletico Madrid still have that game in hand and are sitting just 2 points behind Barca in fourth and have the longest win streak in the league at the moment, having won 5 straight. And they have Alaves this weekend, who are playing okay, but aren't the best side you've ever seen. They're more of a defending side, that they are getting some points by working hard and digging in, but I mean, that's Atletico Madrid's bread and butter. That's who they are. So there you have it. The first official Clásico of the season is here. I will have the 5 headlines out as soon as I can, so like 4 to 5 hours after the game ends. And then the podcast should be out sometime on Sunday for more recap. So as always with El Clásico, the most important thing, I hope you just enjoy the game. And as always, until next time, Forza Barca.